Here you are in a class that requires a public speech. I can only imagine that this was not the highlight of the class that you were looking for. If that's you, well, you're in good company. There are actually different kinds of anxiety, but today I want to talk about communication anxiety and how the primitive parts of your brain, what I'm calling a lizard brain, works both for and against you at times. There's a well-known study which found some people would rather face death than a public speaking situation. Wow. The good news here is that you can always recover from even a bad public speech, but there really is no recovery from death. So let's look at why so many people feel such anxiety about public speaking. Communication anxiety is the fear of being embarrassed in social situations. Most often, these social situations come from worry surrounding what unfamiliar people may think of you. You're probably remembering that you don't feel much anxiety about communicating with young children or with close friends. Of course not. You don't fear the scrutiny in the first case, even if that 4-year-old does insist you are a poo-poo head when you babysit. And you don't feel a problem in that second case. It's your friends you're talking to. But those kinds of situations are not the only communication experiences we have. What about other times when we have to talk to people? How does anxiety play a role and why? To understand this, we need to take a look at the systems we're dealing with in our bodies, both the hardware, our brains, and their software, the memories of our experiences. You know, our brains evolved into more and more complex systems over hundreds of thousands of years. Now, okay, this lecture is not from the biology standpoint. That's a whole nother department in the college. I show you this slide to illustrate how our brains evolved over time. What I'm going to refer to as the lizard brain is really the most basic parts of our brain, including the brainstem and the cerebellum. Sort of everything on the evolutionary chain from lizards on up have this little part of the brain. This part of the brain controls many, if not most, of our basic anatomy systems, as you can imagine, because all creatures on Earth need to have a survival system. And it is within this area of the brain that the infamous fight, flight, or freeze instinct is located. So, in less neurological terms, you have the more logical big brain and a less evolved lizard brain. As you can see, the amygdala is within what I'm calling the lizard brain. The amygdala is a little almond-shaped part of the brain that seems to control our survival instincts. Lucky for most of us, this part of the brain in modern society rarely has to take over to preserve life. It is interesting to note that the lizard brain does not sleep or go offline, if you want to think about it that way. You probably already know this because, if you can, you think about it and recall some time when you were awakened to a strange sound. That was your lizard brain alerting you to danger. It's interesting as to which part of your brain is in control at any given moment. You could be driving along with everything going well when suddenly a threat is realized as another car cuts you off, and your lizard brain will immediately take over and will automatically direct your body to act so as to preserve life. Or in some situations, you could completely freeze with panic. It's as if the lizard brain knocked the big brain, as I call it, offline for a moment, until your life is no longer in danger. Then again, sometimes the lizard brain may send out warning signals that the big brain can be trained to ignore, and then the big brain can stay in control. People in high-stress jobs often must train this automatic response of the lizard brain to take over out of them. They need their thinking brain in charge. So your lizard brain has really just one job: to keep you alive. It can respond faster than the big brain, and it runs on instinct. It is not logical. It doesn't have any capacity for logic. And unfortunately, sometimes this lizard brain does not know you are living in a mostly safe 21st century life. It can pop up at the most inconvenient times and ruin your day. We are, of course, always grateful for those times that the lizard brain gives us a burst of energy and focus when we need it. But seriously, sometimes it is most inconvenient. And unlike the movie Inside Out, Your brain is not run by cute little animated characters with a control panel. It'd be much easier to operate if it were. Brains operate on hormones and biological compounds and chemicals that send signals from cell to cell. The processes were developed literally hundreds of thousands of years ago and have no idea that you're sitting somewhere in a comfortable place watching this video on the internet, hopefully all safe and sound. Your lizard brain is still on the lookout for danger. All day, every day. What can we do about that? Well, to start off, we need to know more about the specifics of how our brain works. We need a user manual. Your lizard brain is always prepped for battle. So I'm going to let some of the Marvel superheroes stand in to help with the visual representation. So your brain, we know, communicates through hormones and molecules and whatnot. Like I said, this is not a biology class, it's a communications class, so cut me some slack here. The first hormone in your lizard's arsenal is adrenaline. Think of adrenaline like the Flash. It's going to prep you for battle. It will increase heart rate, speeds breathing, induces sweating, all the fun stuff. Everyone has experienced this, and some people love it so much we have a term for them, adrenaline junkies. Adrenaline is the reason moms have been able to lift cars off their children and athletes have broken records. Next is norepinephrine. I like to think of norepinephrine as Colossus from the X-Men, especially when he's in the Deadpool movies. He's there as backup, but also represents well. Norepinephrine controls the blood vessel dilation and constriction. It sends blood to the muscles and away from non-essential areas like digestion, the immune system, the reproductive system, etc. Blood needs to move to the muscles so you can prepare to fight or prepare to run away. And next, we have Storm from the X-Men to represent cortisol, which you may have heard referred to as the stress hormone. Cortisol regulates fluid and blood pressure, and as the body needs to put more blood to the muscles in preparation for a fight or flight response, cortisol will increase the blood pressure and move fluid again from those non-essential parts of the body into the bloodstream. Unfortunately for public speakers, the spit in your mouth, it's really unnecessary when fighting a bear or running away from your enemies, so all that fluid in your mouth is shuttled away just when you need it to talk. Don't forget testosterone. It's the last important hormone in the lizard's arsenal. And who could represent that better than Tony Stark's Iron Man? Both men and women have testosterone, but you've guessed it, men have it in much larger amounts. When the lizard brain is triggered, both sexes will produce extra amounts of this hormone as it helps in times of emergency. The massive amount of testosterone in young adult males is what makes risky behavior so appealing to that age group. In times of stress, you would need to think that you absolutely can outrun a bear or win a fight if you are to survive. Testosterone also gives you the desire to win over others. Here's sort of a thought about how the body responds when the amygdala fires up in fear. I imagine you've experienced many of these symptoms when you're frightened, either from a real threat or when your so-called friends decide to jump out and scare you. Your pupils will dilate so you can take in more of the information from your surroundings. Your heartbeat will increase so you can pump more blood to your muscles in preparation to fight or flee. Your stomach will become upset. After all, the blood supply that was once there has now been shifted to the muscle groups, and that burrito you thought you might want to eat, nope, it's not going to be digested for the moment. Your muscles will begin to tense up and even shake as they're all pumped full of blood and chemicals and they're ready to go. You'll begin to sweat even if you haven't exercised at all. This is your body's helpful way of pre-cooling off just before it runs or fights. Interestingly, your lungs will change how they breathe. You will breathe faster and you will use the upper parts of your lungs as opposed to when you're relaxed. When you're relaxed, or when you want to relax your body, your lungs will expand more slowly and will expand from the lower part, making your belly pooch out. Finally, as mentioned before, your mouth will go dry. This unfortunate event happens because the fluid from your spit was moved into the bloodstream. Makes it harder to talk, but there are ways to compensate. So what is there to be scared of that makes our lizard brains trigger the fight or flight? I mean, obviously, bears would be a good reason to trigger the response. And with recent films and TV shows, okay, we might have zombies to worry about. Sure, sure. Some of you may be plagued by nightmares of this guy. Ah! Okay, maybe not. Some of you might be accused of being fearful of commitment, and so on. But what we're here to talk about is a fear of public speaking. So what's up with that? Why would people trigger the same response for a beaver, and public speaking? See, the lizard really kicks in when it fears that death is on the line. So how is death in line? What are you really afraid of? Who dies from public speaking? That's what we need to figure out here. The deal is, humans are tribal creatures and always have been. Let's face it, we don't have any natural weapons. We don't have claws or fangs or poison or armor to defend against predators. But what we do have is language and an ability to depend upon each other and form plans. Humans discovered that if we work together, we can defeat threats like bears or zombies or Justin Bieber. And we also discovered that if we work together, we can harvest great amounts of food to feed everyone. And if we don't work together, we starve and are picked off by predators. The fear of being alone is wired into our DNA. People without a tribe will die. When we lived in tribes, if we were shunned and kicked out, we'd be in trouble. People excluded from the tribe would probably mean death. You can see this response in kids from about the age of 15 months. They will lose their minds when their primary caretaker leaves them. They act as if they'll die without their character. And you know what? To their brains, it does feel that way. As adults, that's what you're afraid of, being shunned by your peer group and being kicked out of the tribe. It's a DNA thing. But is that likely? Here? In college? From the time you started school until you arrived in college, you were put into age-arranged groups. These people became your peers. You had lunch and recess with them. You were expected to find your friends within this group. If you made social errors in front of these people, you would have to face them for all of the coming year and all that day long. Fortunately, nowhere in life does this artificial setup exist anymore. You've probably noticed that college classes are made up of people you've never seen before. They come from backgrounds very different than yours. They may be different ages, nationalities, sexualities, religions, or honestly any other grouping you can think of. If you made a social error in front of a college class, you really won't see these people at lunch or recess, after school, or even next year. So the anxiety you feel about being rejected by the group is really a false fear. There's no group from which to be rejected. Groups in college are so loosely woven as to almost be non-existent. Some people have communication anxiety because we fear a worst-case scenario, that we could die from being kicked out of the tribe. Now, does that really seem possible? It might help you to let your worrying brain go on a worst-case scenario field trip. What would really happen? Here, in a college class, if you gave the worst speech ever, would death be on the line? How about shunning by the tribe? How about being kicked out of college? Being kicked out of the class? Yeah, not to all of it. Sometimes you just have to remind your lizard brain that in no way is death on the line. Let's wrap up by realizing that there are ways to control the chemical reaction when your lizard brain seems to think that there's a threat. First, you can change your breathing to that of a relaxed state. Remember that lizard state of breathing is fast and with the upper parts of the lungs. So, slow and deep breathing can calm a lizard brain almost immediately. Try it. Next, simply knowing more about anxiety is a way to defeat it, and you've learned about that today. The next step is desensitization. That's just a fancy word for practice. If you worry about talking before others, then you should take more opportunities to do just that. You know, it's the same thing as if you were, like me, frightened of spiders. And one of the best way to get over that fear of spiders is to slowly acclimate to being in the same room as a spider until eventually you can not freak out about it so much. It's the same thing with public speaking. And finally, if you feel prepared, then you will lessen the chance of anxiety. Do what your instructor recommends when it comes to readying yourself for the presentation. Practice really can make perfect. Here we are at the end. What'd you learn? I hope you learned a little bit about how the brain processes communication anxiety and what you can do to control those Marvel superheroes in your head.